Part 1. The Solitary Cottage. Deep within the heart of an ancient forest, nestled amidst towering trees and shrouded in perpetual twilight, stood a small, weathered cottage. It was a place untouched by time, its wooden walls warped and gray with age, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the wilderness. Inside, the cottage was equally austere, its furnishings sparse and worn. A lone fireplace, its hearth blackened with soot, provided the only source of warmth and light. Cobwebs dangled from the ceiling like ghostly spiders, and the air was thick with the musty scent of decay. The sole inhabitant of the cottage was an elderly woman, her face etched with lines of sorrow and solitude. She had lived there for as long as anyone could remember, a solitary figure who rarely ventured beyond the property line. The villagers spoke of her in hushed tones, their voices filled with a mixture of pity and fear. Nights were her most dreaded time. The silence of the forest was broken only by the mournful hoot of an owl or the rustling of leaves in the wind. She would often find herself staring into the darkness, her mind racing with 1,000 fears. Part 2. The Unsettling Growl. One night, however, the silence was shattered by a different sound. A low, guttural growl echoed through the woods, sending a shiver down her spine. It was followed by a scratching noise at the back door. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Slowly she crept towards the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the latch. With a creak, the door swung open, revealing a pair of glowing red eyes staring back at her. The creature that stood in the doorway was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It was tall and gaunt, with long skeletal limbs and a face that was almost human, yet twisted and inhuman. Terror gripped her as the creature lunged forward, its claws outstretched. She screamed, her voice lost in the darkness. As the creature closed in, she felt a cold, icy hand wrap around her ankle. She looked down, her blood running cold, as she saw the same glowing red eyes staring up at her from the shadows. Part 3. The Creature's Attack. The creature's grip tightened around her ankle, and she felt a sharp pain shoot through her leg. She tried to pull away, but its strength was immense. The creature began to drag her towards the darkness, its claws raking across her skin. She struggled desperately, her nails digging into the creature's flesh. But it was no use. Its grip was too strong, and she was powerless to resist. She could feel her strength fading, and a wave of despair washed over her. Just as she was about to give up, she heard a sound that filled her with a flicker of hope. It was the sound of footsteps approaching from the distance. Someone was coming to her rescue. Part 4. The Mysterious Figure. As the footsteps grew closer, the creature released its grip on her ankle and vanished into the darkness. She collapsed to the ground, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. A figure emerged from the shadows, its face obscured by the moonlight. It approached her slowly, its footsteps soft and silent. She could not make out its features, but she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The figure knelt beside her and offered her a hand. She took it, and he helped her to her feet. As she stood, she looked up at him, her heart filled with gratitude. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The figure did not answer. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing back into the darkness. Part 5. The Aftermath. The old woman was left alone in the cottage, her mind reeling from the events of the night. She could not shake the feeling that she had not been alone in the forest. Something dark and sinister lurked in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. She spent the rest of her days in a state of constant fear, her sleep disturbed by nightmares of the creature that had attacked her. She knew that she could not remain in the cottage forever. She had to find a way to escape the forest and seek refuge elsewhere. But as she looked out at the endless expanse of trees, she felt a pang of sadness. The cottage had been her home for so many years, and she was not sure if she could ever leave it behind. Part 6. The return years passed, and the old woman had long since left the cottage behind. She had found a new home in a nearby village where she lived a quiet and peaceful life. But the memory of the creature that had attacked her still haunted her dreams. One day, a strange feeling came over her. It was as if she was being drawn back to the cottage, as if something was waiting for her there. Despite her fears, she decided to return. The journey was long and arduous, and by the time she reached the cottage, the sun was beginning to set. The place looked even more abandoned than she remembered, its windows dark and empty. With a heavy heart, she stepped inside. The cottage was filled with dust and cobwebs, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. She wandered through the rooms, her eyes scanning the darkness. Then she heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent a shiver down her spine. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Slowly she turned, her eyes widening in fear. Standing in the doorway was the creature, its red eyes glowing in the darkness. It was larger and more menacing than she remembered, its claws outstretched and its jaws dripping with saliva. Part 7. The Final Confrontation. The old woman knew that there was no escape. She faced the creature, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. She raised her hand and pointed at it, her voice trembling. "You will not hurt me again," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The creature let out a roar that echoed through the cottage. It lunged forward, its claws outstretched. The old woman closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. But nothing happened. The creature stopped just inches away from her, its eyes filled with a strange expression. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. The old woman stood there for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She could not believe what she had just witnessed. Had the creature finally left her alone? Or was this just a temporary reprieve? As she walked out of the cottage, she looked back one last time. The place seemed to be bathed in a soft, golden light. She felt a sense of peace wash over her, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She knew that she would never return to the cottage, but she also knew that she would never forget the events that had taken place there. The creature had become a part of her, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked within the forest.